Hello, my loves. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Hi, hello. My name is Loey, and this day, I feel like this day has been coming for months. This is the official start of my new series here on my channel called Face the Horror. And I have been planning this out, writing out scripts, just really trying to figure out how to do this series in the best way possible for all of you. I started out on YouTube doing makeup content and doing like fashion content and stuff, and along the way I kind of wanted to try out other things, of course, and I started doing horror on my channel, and horror is such an integral part of this channel that like I would never take away, but I really was missing being creative with makeup, like doing my face. But I'm also just like, I don't know, not a particularly like creative makeup person. I feel when it comes to just testing out products, I'm gonna do the same look every single time. That's where Face the Horror came into play. I wanted to do videos talking about the Scp Foundation because I feel like it's kind of been blowing up here on YouTube and all across the internet pretty much. But basically the Scp Foundation is sort of a new mode of like creepypasta and storytelling. And this world is like filled with entities and monsters and just the craziest stuff you could ever imagine, essentially. So in the series, I'm going to be taking one Scp Foundation creature, entity, monster, whatever it may be, and I'm going to tell you all about them while I do a makeup look inspired by that creature. I think it would be a big disservice if I didn't give a massive shout out to Bailey Sarian, who I really think, while I'm not doing the same thing that she is, I really think she revolutionized like makeup and storytelling in her content, and this series as a whole is largely inspired by her. Although we're going to be talking about fiction and it's something very different, I would not want to start the series without giving massive shout outs to Bailey Sarian, who inspires me so much. Without any further ado, let's get into my first episode of this series. Do me a favor and stick around for this one. It might not be your usual cup of tea if you're not like big into makeup and all of that stuff, but I really think you guys are gonna like this. So without any further ado, let's talk about the very first Scp Foundation creature on my list, which is 106, the Old Man. Now, if you're sitting at home and you're like, Lo, what on earth is an Scp? Don't worry, I'm here to explain. I was pretty much in the same boat as you just a couple of months ago, really. And SCPs are kind of like this new wave of storytelling where creators will submit to the Scp Foundation wiki and various websites. It's almost like a crowdsourced creepypasta where people will create these stories written in the form of a police brief about a monster. Well, more like a brief by the Scp Foundation, like explaining what it does, why it's scary, why it's creepy, the backstory behind it. Sometimes there will be photos. It's really interesting. These entities, monsters, ghosts, demons, like there are so many different kinds of these things on the Scp Foundation wiki, and they all kind of vary in degree of danger and like what their motive is. But I felt like SCP-106, aka the Old Man, was a great place for us to start because he is by far one of the scariest entries I have ever seen submitted. SCP-106 is forced to be monitored at all given points in time. Like pretty much there's never a time where he can't be monitored, and he resides in this insane little cell that's made super specifically. He's very dangerous, difficult to control, and new people who come into basically observation rooms with him are briefed really heavily on what exactly he can and probably will do in the weeks or months that they observe. While observation of this creature is key, zero physical contact with the entity is allowed. If it is permitted, this physical interaction between his observers or personnel and this monster, it's to be very highly supervised, and there's always supposed to be like pretty insane barriers between both parties. He's been around since at least World War II, and at least his current confinement space is built in a very like specific way. As we get further into the story, you'll probably realize that the way that SCP-106 is contained is probably due to mishaps in the past. Unfortunately, with this creature, they really had to learn as they went. Now, his physical form is really deceptive because he looks like this little old man. But as you get closer and as you look at him longer, you realize he's not just like any old grandpa. In fact, he looks as if he's like rotting from within, almost like he's a reanimated corpse. There's literally like rot all along his body, and he's basically gray from like the inside out. He has no lips and yellow teeth, and you'll never see him blink, pretty much. I'm pretty sure he has eyelids. That wasn't something I could find. I spent a really long time like very curious. Does 106 even have eyelids? Because he is just always like wide-eyed and staring and creepy as hell, basically. Because 106 doesn't sleep. He doesn't have to sleep. He's always looking, always sitting there with a wide-toothed yellow grin on his spooky little face. Back to his confinement cell. Essentially, the whole thing is made up of lead-lined steel. There's at least 40 layers of this material stacked at a very specific like distance from each other. And everything about this SCP's containment center is made to keep it in, which of course, duh, that makes so much sense, but let me explain a little bit further. In his report on the Scp Foundation website, I mean, they're talking about like centimeters, that the seal beams are supposed to be separated from each other in order to keep him contained properly. There are very specific beams in very specific places. There's like 80,000 like volts of electricity or whatever running through that area. Like he's always monitored. The lights are never, ever off, and eyes are on him at all given points in time. Because if you look away at the wrong moment, you're gonna be his next meal. Despite the fact that I have called him the old man, and he is well known as the old man, he is anything but harmless. Like I said, he basically looks like a reanimated corpse, like he is a walking dead person that was just underground for 100 years. Very gray tone, like he looks like he should not be alive, essentially. And in images that I've seen of 106, it's crazy. He just looks like a walking zombie, pretty much. The other really creepy thing about him, aside from just his general appearance as this reanimated corpse, is that he will sit still for just like months at a time. Like I said, you won't ever see 106 move or blink. If you do, it's a huge cause for alarm. He takes victims by surprise with his extreme speed. So while he looks like, you know, this walking dead person, essentially, like he shouldn't even be alive, let alone able to move around, when he's not sitting still and he starts to move, he will catch you very off guard because he is so fast, like Edward Cullen Twilight fast, you know? Hold on, spider monkey. That's what he'd say to you, maybe. I don't think he can talk, actually. So the reason he stays so motionless, it's thought, at least by researchers, is to catch like potential victims off guard. Because he stays still for so long, he lets them sort of get sloppy in a way, and he catches them at their most vulnerable when they make a very small mistake. Another creepy fact about 106, he can remain suspended upside down indefinitely, it's thought. Of course, we haven't been able to observe him for long periods of time, but he can like scale up any vertical surface. Basically, let's say there's like a wall with no grips to it whatsoever. It doesn't matter. 106 can scale up it and hang from nothing on the ceiling forever, basically. While he's usually an old man, he is capable of changing shape. The sick part is that no matter how hard he tries, because you might be at home thinking, okay, if he can change shape, of course he's gonna get out of that room, pretend to be like a researcher or something and just escape. But the giveaway with him is that he can't seem to get rid of this like rot on his skin, even when he's someone else, even when he disguises himself as someone else. That like rotting flesh stays on him constantly, and it's just coming from the inside out, essentially. So what he will do to really freak out observers, because he knows he's being watched, and the like most screwed up part about 106, at least in my opinion, is that like he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows he's being observed. He knows he really can't get out. And so he will transform into like women and children with like their bones barely hanging on, like just flesh ripped off of them, looking so disturbing. And he'll just stare at the observers and they just have to sit there and watch. Like they can't look away. It must be so unsettling to see a child or a woman, or, you know, just maybe even like someone you know. I feel like that would be something he would do, is just like disguise himself as like someone you're familiar with to just get under your skin. And he does this just for pleasure, you know? So no matter what, even when he's as a little boy or a woman or your next door neighbor, when he transforms into a different form, like the flesh on him just immediately starts to decay. So it's always a dead giveaway. You always know who he is. So I guess that's one good thing. He can't really fool you. I think that's really interesting with this SCP, and maybe almost like it's almost like his curse. Like he can't get away from that rot within him. Now that you're familiar with 106, his looks, how much they're trying to control this creature, let me give you one example of a time that he managed to break out of his confinement, and basically what he'll do if you are unlucky enough to become one of his victims. I'll set the scene for you as soon as I'm done baking. It was late at night when one observer was on duty with 106. And at this point, he had been motionless, almost like in a hibernation. It's like these periods were like hibernation for him, where he wouldn't move for weeks or months at a time. And he had been still like this, staring at the cameras, watching the observers, but not moving, grinning from ear to ear with his creepy, lipless, yellow-toothed grin for 3 months. Everything was normal that night, and I have to imagine that the observer was probably just sitting there with his cup of coffee, just hanging out. I mean, this guy has not moved from where he sits in 3 freaking months. This poor dude, I'm sure he knew what he was signing up for, but he could not have imagined the horrors he was about to witness. That's the thing with 106. He catches you when you least expect him. And by the time that you know that you gotta run, it's too late. So the observer's just sitting there, probably drinking his coffee, hanging out, and he notices as he's watching 106 through the camera, observing his motionless, toothy little grin, that his arm twitches ever so slightly. That was enough to send the observer into a blind panic, and he immediately picked up the phone in the room to call higher ups and alert everyone in the building that 106 was awake. I think even the observer that night probably knew that it was too late, but he still had to do basically what he was trained to. The observer had barely lifted the phone from the hook when it happened. This rust-colored fluid drained from the old man's body into the floor below, and onlookers watched in horror as it happened. This poor onlooker is just sitting there with the phone up to his ear like, oh my god, this guy is awake. He can barely even speak, trying to tell everyone to evacuate, to get to safety, because old man is up and he's pissed. See, the thing with the old man is that this fluid from his body actually makes him corrosive in nature. Basically, he can like phase and burn through any material, metal, anything known in existence. And that's why his room was made so specifically. What's funny is that he can't be harmed, he can't be hurt. Nothing hurts him, causes him pain, at least that researchers know of. However, he has this crazy aversion to like lead and also really bright lights. And so they use these things to contain him in many, many layers, because it's like, while it doesn't hurt him, while it can't cause him harm, he's a reanimated corpse. Like, they can't kill him. He just doesn't like it, but this rust-like material is just oozing out from the old man's body, his gray little body, while the observers whisper into the phone, he's awake. And everyone on the other line gets into like panic mode. They have a whole preparation set up for what to do when the old man comes to. And I say comes to, but it's really just like, he's just waiting. He's just hibernating. He is like a little cobra in the grass waiting to strike at any given point in time. So the old man is grinning his toothy, lifeless, lipless grin into the camera. He knows the observers are watching, and he knows how terrified they are of him. And he loves it. This is what he was born to do. With a single small nod at the camera, the old man sank into the floor below him through the rusty orange colored fluid, and he was gone. Because of the fact that literally no material can stop him, he is easily one of the hardest SCPs that the Foundation has to control, and he's actually in the Keter class of SCPs. Now, there are different classes in the SCP universe for how dangerous they are, you know, how much harm they'll cause, how hard they are to contain, and the Keter class is observed for those that are so difficult to contain and will wreak havoc and cause mass destruction once out of their container. So the old man sinks through 40 layers of lead, which he hates for some reason. The observers run to the door. They're freaked out and they know what's coming. But before they can even reach it, the only exit in the room, that rust-like substance, that goo, appears on the only exit that they have, and they know it's over. And they back into a corner as the old man comes through the material, grinning at them the same way he did under those fluorescent bulbs in that lead-filled room that they built specifically to keep him away. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide for the 3 observers in the room that day. Nothing to do except wait, knowing exactly what was coming. Meanwhile, a defense team, essentially a team designated to try to take down and recontain SCP-106 as best they could. Basically, their whole job is to get the old man back in the freaking room. And even they know how impossible this feat is, but they've got to do something. They can't just wait. Because if he breaks out of that building and then gets to the general public, I mean, who knows what could happen? He kills for the fun of it, basically. Because he doesn't have to eat, he doesn't have to drink, he just sits still, motionless for hours and hours at a time. And over the many, many decades that he has been in the SCP's kind of observation, the Foundation's observation, they've never seen him eat, never seen him do basically anything to sustain himself. So this is his time to shine, and he's ready to party. And if he ever reached the general public, who knows what kind of havoc he could cause, what kind of pain and torture he could endure. And so the defense team runs to try to subdue him. It's said with SCP-106 that the best way to find him is simply to follow the screams, and screaming there was on that fateful day. After a very short period of time, the screaming quieted. And the 2 people on this defense team are standing there, you know, all their weapons at their ready, looking at each other, knowing what they're gonna find when they walk into this room. So after a brief moment of updating higher personnel on what had happened, that the screaming had stopped, that, you know, they were pretty sure what they were gonna find inside, the 2 defense team members walked in, and what they found was unimaginable. Though they had been warned about it so many times, nothing can prepare you for the sight that you will see after SCP-106, the old man, exercises his power. The bodies on the floor were unrecognizable. Most of them simply bone with pieces of flesh hanging off by a thread. It was like everything had been cleaned off. And in my opinion, I think that's how SCP-106 is sustaining himself. I think he's eating people. Ugh. While most of them had been torn to shreds and were bare bones and just, ugh. It was a disgusting sight to see, but there was only one of the observers left in like somewhat recognizable condition. The one who had seen that old man twitch. He was gray and much like the old man, looked almost like he was like rotting from the inside out. It was as if he had become one of those corpses, just like the old man. And his hair was gray, his body was gray. He looked like he had been dead for like 100 years, mummified essentially. His bones were like protruding almost out of his skin, and his mouth was permanently stretched open into an eternal scream. One that he must have made when he saw the old man coming toward him. It's a fear and a sight most of us should hope to never see. So there the bodies were, laying on the floor with every bit of the life force they had once had sucked right out of them. Now, members of the SCP defense team, essentially, they're made for this. Like, they have trained their entire lives for these crazy situations, and their entire existence, essentially, they're like the best of the best. If anyone's gonna subdue these things, it's gonna be them. But even those men were shaking as they lifted up their walkie-talkies to inform everyone that it was too late and this monster was on the loose. People on the other side heard them begin to whisper the report of what they were seeing when one of the men started screaming, and those on the other line probably didn't even have to guess what he was seeing. But in that room, filled with the carcasses of so many people already, was SCP-106, the old man, hanging motionless, upside down from the ceiling, hanging on to nothing, really. He was grinning down at the two men, and the one who had started screaming at the side of him immediately began to open fire, trying to take him down. But this meant nothing to the old man, who plucked him up from the ground like he was like a berry coming from a bush. He just snatched him up, and the other one just stood there, completely helpless. The old man, as he touched another wall of this room that had already seen the death of so many people, spread more of that like rust-colored substance in his wake. And with his creepy, toothy, wide-smiled grin at the other officer standing there looking at him, carrying his partner, the old man disappeared into the rust, taking the other officer with him. Okay, you might be thinking to yourself, like, this guy's scary as heck. Like, he is really freaky, but like, I don't know. If it's just certain death he has you, I already know the kind of pain and torture he's gonna inflict, but you know nothing. You know nothing, Jon Snow. I've never watched that show. Because when they went through that rust, they weren't phasing into another room. Oh no. SCP-106 was actually taking the officer into what is referred to as his pocket dimension. So the old man, who can break through any metal substance in the world, is just generally speaking obsessed with torturing people, wreaking havoc. He loves to cause harm, and nothing can subdue or stop him, has a pocket dimension. And essentially, this is a reality suspended within our own reality. So in this instance, he takes the officer into this mini reality that he has. And it's really interesting because inside is a maze of endless walls and corridors. And when you are transported to this pocket dimension, this alternate reality, all you can do is run endlessly through halls and halls of the same like white walls surrounding you. There's no exit to this maze. It goes on forever. And the entity can bend time and space around him so that you can never actually run away from him. What I thought was so interesting was that, to me at least, it's really clear that like if SCP-106 wanted to kill you, he just could. You know, he would. He does it with the blink of an eye. And most of the time you can't even catch him doing it. So this is purely for sport. It's just for fun as he chases his victims around this maze and this alternate reality where they can't be saved. They can't do anything. They're just at his mercy to run forever. And what if you give up, you say? What if you just sit down and don't give him the thrill of the chase? He can turn into anything he wants. He knows everything about you, and he can transform into loved ones of yours to cause you severe psychological harm. So you really don't want to get caught by this guy. Yes, the physical pain is god awful, but imagine your son or daughter screaming for help, rotting from the inside out as this old man says unthinkable things, and you know it's not them, but you can't look away. The reason that we know about this alternate dimension is he's let people go in the past because he really just kind of does this for the thrill of the hunt. Like I said, he could kill them if he wanted to, but it seems like his only real purpose in life is to make people just suffer. Like that is his mission, and he will achieve it. Now, meanwhile, outside of the pocket dimension, everyone knows it's too late for the officer who's been stuck inside. Even his own partner knows there is probably no seeing him ever again. But in the meantime, while he's essentially being used as a bait, highly skilled containment officers are trying to get together their plan. And there is a very specific plan in place for when 106 gets out. Like I said, he had been dormant for about 3 months at that point, but this is a thing that happens all the time because he can just break through any substance known to man. Like, he can just do whatever the hell he wants, basically. So the containment officers are getting to the plan, and it's actually written out on the SCP website that essentially a person between the ages of 10 to 25 will be used for the containment procedure. Oftentimes they use prisoners, people who have done really awful things, especially people who have messed with the SCP Foundation, and they tie them up, they contain them. I really hope this is mostly not 10-year-olds. Like, that's crazy that they would use anything from a child to a 25-year-old. And also, why doesn't the old man want other old men? Or like old people? He just wants the youngins. I think he literally drains the life force from them. That's my theory. Containment officers restrain the individual, the victim, and it's then that they begin to basically just cause this person like severe bodily harm. Breaking bones, crushing fingers, just like trying very hard to cause this person a lot of harm. And the victim is like restrained. There's nothing they can do but scream out in just agonizing pain. It's then that the Foundation, and this is so screwed up, puts like a megaphone up to the person's mouth. Like, they play it over the intercom, the person screaming in pain, and everyone has to listen to this as they know what this person is about to go through. As I said, that our security officer for our neighborhood just drove by. He's like, is 106 in there? The protocol is to begin with one method of causing severe pain, i.e. breaking a bone, a femur, snapping an Achilles tendon, which makes me cringe to think about. That sounds god awful. But they inflict this pain, and usually 106 comes running at the sound of someone being tortured because he just can't pass up witnessing another person going through pain. So much so that in this instance, he wound up abandoning that officer in his pocket dimension in the alternate reality, lost in a maze forever. That officer was never seen again. He can't resist it. He hears someone in pain and he has to come join in. He's like, no one can cause pain but me. So comes running. And if he doesn't come running at first in other situations, basically the Foundation will continue to cause their prisoner, their victim, more and more and more pain until he comes running. And it's been foolproof. It's worked every single time. Once he takes the bait and he comes to inflict more pain onto the victim, he is quickly shut off in the room. And I think they just have like multiples of this identical room, like the LED and the, you know, the fluorescent lights and everything like that, knowing that he's gonna get out, you know, and they're gonna have to make repairs to the other room at some point. I think he like cycles between several of these. So they close him up in this room with the bright lights and the lead floors and walls with his victim while he just tortures them, causing his pain, just blind to everything else. It's like a horse with blinders on, just focused on causing as much pain as humanly possible, but also probably knowing that he had gotten trapped again. He just can't let up a good torture sesh. So he's closed up and he's contained again. And then the Foundation has to get to work with removing all of that corrosive material from, you know, the walls and everything. And they have to wear like these thick gloves and take really, you know, cautious measures to make sure that they won't get hurt. And in this situation, the monster had 5 victims. So he killed the 3 observers. He took that officer into his pocket dimension who was never seen again. And then he also killed the victim who was basically sacrificed up by the Foundation. SCP actually stands for, and I've heard it has different meanings and stuff, but it stands for Secure, Contain, Protect. That's the whole mission of this Foundation. To take these monsters to, you know, secure them in their facility, to contain them and protect the general public. New people come in to replace the lives that were lost to become the new observers of SCP-106. All of them having heard the rumors, but with none of them really able to begin to imagine exactly what wound up happening that day. And the cycle continues. It'll probably happen again in a month, maybe less, maybe more. Maybe he'll be so still that you won't notice him twitching ever so slightly as he smiles his toothy grin at you. But by the time you do notice, it'll be too late. And you might be asking yourself, Where the heck did this man come from? Where did a being that can like phase through any metal known to man, where did he come from? Oh, I forgot to contour my nose. And luckily for you, we just might know the origin story for this foul creature. Let's go back to World War II. Corporal Lawrence was a soldier fighting in World War II, and he was largely unremarkable when you first looked at him. Plain stature, plain voice, plain everything. Average height, just the most basic white bread looking human being you could begin to imagine is what Corporal Lawrence was. Now, you might be thinking, all right, well, if he was so plain, he must not have been that freaky, but he somehow managed to unnerve every single person he ever came into contact with. And that's because Corporal Lawrence was known to stare for a beat longer than he should have. You know, he would make eye contact for just a second longer than felt comfortable, in a way that people thought at first, you know, maybe they were imagining things, but then as things went on and they discovered more of his weird behaviors, they got very unnerved by this. He rarely slept, would often just be seen staring into space in his bunker bed. And when he would sleep, soldiers would hear, those who were unlucky enough to have been roomed with him, they would hear him mumbling things in his sleep. Now, usually kind of like, I don't know, things that like couldn't really be deciphered, like just nonsense for the most part. But when you would hear a clear word, it was always something that would freak you out. For example, one night, one of his roommates moved out after he heard Corporal Lawrence in his sleep whisper his own daughter's name. And to the soldier's shock, he heard his daughter's giggle coming out of Corporal Lawrence's mouth. So he was weird, and he really scared the people around him. What's stranger is, of course, they were in the middle of war, so things were disorganized and, you know, kind of difficult to keep track of, and I'll give them that. No one could find Corporal Lawrence's orders to be there with them anyway. And whispers began to spread through soldiers that the higher-ups couldn't find his orders, could never get a straight answer out of him as to, why are you here? We can't find your paperwork. Can you produce your paperwork? Can you give us a birth certificate? Nothing could ever be produced by Corporal Lawrence, who always managed to mumble his way out of it and unnerve them to the point that they always just saw him off and didn't search into it much further. After all, they were in the middle of war, and so I guess every able body fighting, you know, is probably a body that they're not going to send home. The whispers spread amongst the soldiers, who began realizing themselves that Corporal Lawrence had kind of just shown up one day. Basically, like before they shipped off to war, he just sort of appeared, and it was like nobody really knew where did he come from. You know, they couldn't like pinpoint how he had even come to be with them. And they started to, almost as a joke at this point, whisper about him being a curse. He was so mysterious and creepy, and he, you know, never slept, and he was always whispering these strange things when he did speak. So the soldiers kind of convinced themselves, maybe this guy's a curse. And I think it started off as a joke, just a little, you know, a little gag amongst everybody. But as time went on, I think everybody really started to believe it. It's probably because of how unnerving he was, and not because he was a particularly good fighter, that his superiors ended up sending Corporal Lawrence off into the trenches to basically go die, honestly. They just wanted him away. Everyone around him had really grown to just despise him and be very fearful of him. Everyone just got a bad feeling from this dude, and so when the opportunity came up, he was sent off to the most dangerous part of the battle, and I think that everyone around him was probably just hoping he wouldn't come back. Of course, he wasn't the only person on these dangerous enemy lines. There were countless other soldiers who really didn't give two craps about the corporal's cursed status. They just wanted to focus on their mission. And I think they probably accepted him a little bit more than other people did, because they were truly on the front lines. And I mean, it was life or death here. You weren't thinking about this creepy guy and his mumblings and stuff. You were thinking about keeping yourself and all of your people around you alive. This is kind of just my theory, but I feel like he had to have felt like some sort of relief in this situation, not being scrutinized and stared at 24/7. Because, you know, these people didn't care. They were just trying to survive. So it was during the days of Corporal Lawrence being in these trenches in this really active battle zone and in the most dangerous part of the war, that him, along with other people in his squadron, stumbled across something unexplainable. The corporal was not the first person to see this. It was actually a different soldier, and when he happened upon this sight, he fled just in pure shock. But Corporal Lawrence was interested, and so he went to go observe what it was that had freaked out this man in the middle of war so badly. There, deep in the trenches, were the bodies of soldiers. Whether they were enemies or some of these people's very own soldiers, they really didn't know. And they were unrecognizable, to say the least. On the ground, surrounding their decaying flesh and bone, was this thick, black, tar-like substance. It was almost inky in nature. Now, all that was left of the bodies inside was skin and bone. It smelled rancid, as if those bodies had been there for months, which didn't really make any sense. And further inspection could show that it was actually a hole that these bodies were coming out of, almost as if they had fallen into the hole and crawled out. But by the time they reached the surface, it was just too late, and they were skin and bones of their former selves. So other soldiers are running from this site, super freaked out. But Corporal Lawrence was a curious little cat. And while he was a man of few words, and while he was a little bit weird, he just wasn't quite sure about this hole. It seemed to almost be calling to him in a way. And so he gently prodded it with his boot. Now, one of the soldiers who had checked it out first, who was standing off to the side, trying to kind of like, recollect himself after smelling this putrid smell, seeing these bodies in this hole in a way that just defied all laws of nature. It didn't make any sense why they looked like they had been decomposing for years. This soldier off to the side stared in horror as Corporal Lawrence gently prodded the hole with his foot, gently prodded the outside of it. The ground gave way and the corporal fell in, screaming as he tumbled through the black tar substance. His fellow soldiers immediately jumped into action, calling for him, yelling for him, but all they could hear inside were these god-awful, unexplainable sounds. Growling, screaming, scraping, somebody trying to claw their way back out. And they feared that whatever it was that was inside of there had truly gotten their friend as silence finally fell. Now, those higher ups that hated him so much, and those people he unnerved, to the degree that he did knew that he had probably perished here, they probably would have celebrated, but these guys are freaked out because they don't understand what the hell just happened. One of his fellow soldiers got close to the hole and gently and very carefully stretched his hand out inside. And, his fellow soldiers were like, don't do that. Like, we don't know what could happen. And before the soldier could pull his hand back, he saw a trembling gray hand coming back towards him. It was Corporal Lawrence, covered in tar, shaking. His eyes were rolling crazily, and he looked like he had aged greatly during his time in the black tar pit, but he was alive and unharmed, it seemed, just very shaken up. For the first time, this man who had showed like no emotion basically was finally showing one, and it seemed to be fear. I'm filming in the middle of the day, but the sky is so gray. I just turned on another light source because I have my studio mirror over here. Like I said, Corporal Lawrence was just really shaken up. He wasn't harmed. He wasn't even like scraped up, just covered in this black tar substance and shaking, and this guy who had never showed that emotion before was finally seemingly unnerved by something. Whatever it was he saw in that hole really scared him. This didn't last long though, because by the time that they got back to base with Corporal Lawrence in tow, because they were like, this guy has to be like checked out by professionals. Like, we don't know what the heck just happened. He was almost giddy by the time that they got back there, after the immediate shock had worn off, giddy about his experience. But when questioned about what exactly happened in that hole, what did you see, Mr. Lawrence? He had nothing really to say. He would mumble incoherently, pretty much as he always did, not saying much of anything. Somehow he was even more of a horror to interact with and behold than he was before the incident with the black tar hole. If that wasn't weird enough, after this, everyone but Corporal Lawrence, who had touched the hole or touched his body after it came out of the tar hole, began experiencing unexplainable things. I say unexplainable things because it didn't make any sense, like medically or logically, what was happening with them. Anywhere they had like touched the black tar or Corporal Lawrence, the skin on that particular area of the body was rotting away. Almost as if where they had touched Corporal Lawrence or that black tar substance was rotting from the inside out. If you thought they were scared before, now he's the only person from everyone who interacted with this hole who is not like deeply unwell, basically. For some reason, something with him is not making him rot from the inside out. Sorry, I can't talk and do eyeliner at the same time. The fact that he was even more unnerving after this incident, his wide-eyed stare, the fact that he was the only one who wasn't rotting from the inside out, it unnerved those around him to the point that they could not bear to be around him anymore. After multiple medical examinations, the corporal was eventually just transferred away from the group and to a different unit. They could not stand being around him for a second longer. Oh, but that did not stop the rumors from reaching them of a cursed man floating around from unit to unit in the war, place to place, and yet without any papers to ever truly identify himself. He was called a curse by many people who believed that with him he brought awful, awful luck. His wide-eyed staring grin and the way he would stare off into space for hours at a time unnerved anyone who ever came in contact with him. Sounds a lot like a certain someone we've grown to know, huh? It was clear that this guy was really sick after whatever it was that happened in that black tar hole. And while I don't think that everyone that he then was, stationed to be with knew about that specific experience, they knew something wasn't right. And so often he was kept in the medical ward while they tried to figure out, what's wrong with this guy, get him on the right medication, help him out, because all he did was stare off into space and grin from ear to ear and mumble, sometimes even the names of people who had mysteriously vanished weeks prior. You would catch him mumbling their names before giggling wildly. I had to do my lashes and my inner rim eyeliner off camera because I couldn't talk and be on camera. But what is this lighting? Why is this guy like this at 4 p.m.? I don't know. Does it kind of add to the ambiance? I'll switch to my real ring light for the end shots and stuff. Anyway, he's at this news station. He's being creepy as hell, Corporal Lawrence, whispering the names of men who had gone missing and nobody knew where they were. Wherever he went, he was bringing with him death, destruction, missing people. It was never really explained how it was that he showed up wherever it was that he went. He just kind of was there. So one day, as he is in this hospital ward, and granted, of course, they're in the middle of war, there are plenty of people in the hospital ward. A nurse comes in to check on Corporal Lawrence and everyone else in their room when she makes a startling discovery. See, Lawrence and everyone else inside had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind them smears of black tar all over the walls. The nurse screamed and looked around frantically for any signs of life. All she found were handprints in the black sludge and frantic smears of it, as though people had been trying to run away from whatever it was that attacked. As she was investigating, almost certainly completely in shock at this point, she stumbled across the most disturbing thing I'm sure she had ever seen. A maze of single teeth lined up one right after the other in a perfect spiral on the floor. Now, dental records would later show that every single person who had been in that ward's teeth. Dogs! Silence! No, you see the FedEx man every single day of your life. I have an addiction to online shopping. Surely you know this by now. So she sees these teeth lined up in a perfect spiral, like it was a maze on the floor, in a pile of black sludge. And the only person whose teeth were not accounted for there, Corporal Lawrence's. He was the only one who seemingly escaped without leaving a single piece of himself behind, and he disappeared without a trace. No one ever found the bodies of the other 18 people who were in the ward with him that day, and they never found Lawrence again. But all throughout Europe at this time, during the war and well after, people would go missing, while rumors of a cursed man who would show up unannounced with no paperwork to document who he was or why he was there continued to spread. And Corporal Lawrence continued to inflict serious pain and torture onto people as he became SCP-106, the Old Man. And that, my dearest friends, is the story of SCP-106, or the Old Man. I put on my wig My wigs are always from Udemy. I feel like people always ask because I went for like a really gray scaled kind of like smoky look today, and I wanted to kind of like bring the wig in with those sort of like gray tones. I liked the blue that it brought in, kind of like the veins that run throughout the corpse body of 106. I'm also wearing my friend Corpse's merch for literally no reason except that it's so comfortable, and I thought it was funny because SCP-106 is a corpse and corpse is corpse. You get it. Oh man, I cracked myself up. Here's my thought process behind 106. I think he was already like a really messed up person. In his days as Corporal Lawrence, I think that like he already was kind of screwed up and like was doing weird things and wasn't quite normal to everyone else. And then I think the isolation from people, like no one really accepting him, I think that that probably made it worse in a way, because like he didn't have any friends, like no one would really talk to him, so he just stayed in his weirdness. And then when he found that black tar thing, and it kind of turned him into his final like 106 SCP form, I think he realized after the initial shock of being in the hole how much he enjoyed pain and torturing other people, and that that was what was going to keep him going. If you enjoyed this video and you want more episodes of Face the Horror in the future, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. It would mean so much to me if you guys could give me feedback down below. Tell me your thoughts. If you have an SCP you want me to check out next time, definitely link that as well. I want to say a special thank you to my subscriber Kayla for being a member of this channel. If you guys want to join my channel memberships, get one extra video from me every single month behind the scenes of my channel, an extra members exclusive video every single month, you can go ahead and hit that join button. It should be somewhere around my name. We would love to have you in the fam. And I think that's going to be all for me today. Thank you guys so much once again for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I love you very, very much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.